I met Tiago, a charming 25-year-old young man, and everything changed. Trapped in a dull marriage, I found an excitement in it that made me feel alive again. But this new passion would soon become an emotional trap, while my husband began to suspect something. How far would I be willing to go for love? And you? What would you do in my situation? Share where you're watching in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. The first time Tiago entered my store, the world seemed to stop. He was just 25 years old, with that infectious smile that lit up the room and an energy I hadn't seen in decades. I, Mariana, in my 50s and with a life full of obligations, found myself instantly attracted to him. It was as if he brought a breath of fresh air to the monotony of my existence. At first, everything seemed innocent. Quick conversations about the products, a look that lasted a little longer than necessary, and then a friendship began to form. Tiago was kind and always knew exactly how to make me laugh, something I hadn't seen in my husband in a long time. The exchange of messages became frequent and, in a short time, our meetings turned into something much more intense. I was the one who took the initiative to suggest a coffee after work. I still remembered the feeling of being wanted, of being seen. What started as a simple coffee date soon turned into secret meetings, whispers in dark corners of the store, and a connection I didn't expect. But with each shared laugh, a shadow approached. The excitement was blinding, but there was a cost. At each meeting, I felt like I was cheating not only on my husband, but on myself. The line between right and wrong began to blur. What did I want? Be happy? Or was it just a passing whim? As I experienced the joy of loving again, guilt began to creep into my heart. I knew that sooner or later, all of this would have consequences. In the days that followed, the adrenaline of my escapades with Tiago became an addiction. Each message from him was like a dose of euphoria, and I found myself daydreaming, imagining our next meetings. It was easy to forget that there was a lifetime of responsibilities and expectations waiting for me at home. The passion I felt for him made me forget who I was and, for a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. But the euphoria soon turned into anxiety. My husband, Carlos, began to notice my change in mood. He asked me if everything was okay, but I always covered it up, saying I was just tired from work. The truth is that I was exhausted, but not from work. It was the weight of living a double life, between forbidden love and the life I had built. The nights I should have spent with Carlos were now filled with the secrets I kept, and this began to eat away at my conscience. One night, while I was alone in the store, Tiago appeared unexpectedly. He brought flowers and a charming smile. My feelings were a mixture of joy and panic. The risk of being discovered was palpable, but the possibility of being with him was irresistible. What had started as an escape had now become an emotional battlefield. I wanted to keep the flame burning, but I couldn't ignore the guilt that was beginning to consume my heart. During our meeting, he pulled me closer and whispered words that warmed my soul. "You deserve to be happy, Mariana. Don't let anyone turn off your light." I knew those words were like poison, trapping me more and more in their web. But there was something more, a desire to be free. A part of me wanted to scream that I was more than just a wife, more than just a mother. I wanted to live the life I had wanted. And so, between the flowers and the whispers, the lines became even more blurred. What did I really want? A life with Tiago or the security that my marriage gave me? What if my husband found out everything? The weight of this doubt began to suffocate me, and the future that had once seemed promising was now an ominous shadow. The next morning, light filtered through the windows of my house, but the darkness in my mind was almost oppressive. I woke up with a feeling of discomfort, the weight of guilt crushing my chest. Carlos was next to me, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the emotional storm I was facing. What hurt me most was knowing that he didn't deserve this, but, somehow, the urgency of my love for Tiago prevented me from giving up that overwhelming passion. That morning, I decided to leave for the store early. I needed the distraction, the adrenaline of seeing Tiago. While driving, Every traffic light I stopped at seemed to remind me of what was at stake. The feeling of being alive mixed with guilt, creating a tension that followed me like a shadow. When I arrived at the store, Tiago was there, waiting for me. He looked more handsome than ever, with his messy hair and a smile that brightened my day. We went to work, exchanging furtive glances and smiles that only we understood. But as the day progressed, worry began to set in. What would happen if Carlos decided to show up at the store? What if a client saw us together? During lunchtime, we managed to escape to a nearby cafe. The place was empty, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. We talked about everything and nothing, but soon the conversation turned to us. "Do you feel happy with me?" he asked, and my breath hitched for a moment. The truth was, I didn't know. Happiness seemed like an illusion, a mirage that receded whenever I tried to reach it. "I feel alive," I replied, but a part of me screamed that the life I wanted was a lie. Tiago leaned closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "We can make this work, Mariana. We can escape." His words were a song that resonated in my mind, but the thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying. And, deep down, there was a doubt. Was I willing to sacrifice my life for this passion? As the conversation unfolded, my phone vibrated on the table, and my heart stopped for a moment. It was a message from Carlos. "Where are you?" A chill ran down my spine, and what once seemed like a dream now turned into a nightmare. What would I say? How would I explain that I was here, with a man who wasn't my husband? "I need to go back," I muttered, the urgency of the situation beginning to overwhelm me. Tiago looked at me with a worried expression, but he knew there was no more time. What once seemed like a fairy tale was now turning into a nightmare. And I needed to face reality. It was time to make a decision. That afternoon, the pressure in my chest intensified. As I walked back to the store, each step felt heavier than the last. Tiago was there, anxiety written all over his face. He immediately realized that something wasn't right. "What happened?" he asked, and I couldn't find the words. The idea of saying that my husband was suspicious was a blow, a revelation that could ruin everything. "Carlos sent a message," I replied, my voice cracking. He bit his lip, clearly worried. "You need to be careful, Mariana. We can't let this get to him." James' words were a warning. But instead of reassuring me, they intensified the feeling that I was walking on a tightrope. I was taking too many risks, and the realization was starting to hit me like a bucket of cold water. As the day progressed, the tension increased. The clock on the wall seemed to move slowly. And I got lost in thoughts about what was happening at home. Carlos was so aware of my change, but how could I explain that this was all a search for something he could no longer give me? My feelings for Tiago were a form of escape, but now I felt trapped. As if I were trapped in a trap I created myself. That night, when I returned home, Carlos was watching TV, but he couldn't concentrate on the scenes on the screen. I felt him watching me, and guilt gnawed at every inch of my conscience. What was I doing? It was time to face the truth. I tried to distract myself with casual conversations, but he seemed more distant, perhaps also feeling the pressure between us. In bed, as I tried to sleep, reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. What did I really want? Was I willing to sacrifice my life and the love I built with Carlos for a passion that could be fleeting? The dilemma left me restless, and the only certainty I had was that something needed to change. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The life of lies and secrets was consuming me. The next day would be crucial. I needed to decide what really mattered and what I was willing to lose. The next day arrived with a feeling of apathy. While getting ready, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw a tired woman, trapped in a cycle of wrong choices. What was once passion was now mixed with fear and uncertainty. Even so, upon arriving at the store, Tiago's smile made my heart quicken. He had this power over me. And at the same time, it was a weapon that could hurt me. The morning passed slowly, but when I finally had a moment alone with Tiago, the anxiety began to evaporate. You look different, he said, his expression worried. What happened? I hesitated, struggling with the words that were stuck in my throat. What would I say? That I was having an emotional breakdown because of a double life that was destroying me? I'm just thinking a lot, I finally managed to say. He moved closer, his hands cupping my face. You need to tell me what's going on. I can't help you if you don't tell me. His gaze was intense. And it made me feel a mix of relief and panic. What did I really want? Did you want to continue this relationship or did you need to give up? The truth is, I'm scared, I confessed, and felt my heart pound. Carlos started to distrust me. I don't know what to do. Tiago's face changed, and I could see the weight of the situation affecting him. He was young and full of dreams, and he didn't want that to become a burden in his life. I don't want you to miss your wedding for me, he said sincerely. You need to make a decision. If this is going to be serious, we need to be honest about everything. His words echoed in my mind like a call to action. But the idea of having to choose was overwhelming. The pressure of deciding between what was safe and what made me feel alive was leaving me paralyzed. Deep down, I knew I needed time to think. Emotions were running high, and I didn't want to make a hasty choice. I needed to understand what I really wanted, the burning passion I felt for Tiago or the life I had built with Carlos. That night, after a day full of uncertainty, when I got home, the atmosphere was dense. Carlos was there, watching TV, but the atmosphere was tense. He looked at me with an expression that seemed like he wanted to know what was going on, but I didn't have the courage to open up. That life I was living couldn't last forever. That night, insomnia became my companion. While Carlos slept next to me, I lost myself in turbulent thoughts. What did I really want? My mind filled with memories, laughter, and moments shared with Carlos, contrasted with the intensity of what I felt for Tiago. There was something intoxicating about our relationship. But passion was a double-edged sword, and I was getting closer and closer to cutting myself. The next morning, a feeling of determination enveloped me. I needed to have a frank conversation with Tiago. I couldn't continue leading this double life, nor could I let my fear decide for me. When I got to the store, I looked for him. Tiago's look when he saw me was like a ray of sunshine, but soon my heart sank as I remembered the reality that surrounded us. Auntie, we need to talk, I said, pulling him to a far corner. The urgency in my voice made his face light up with concern. I'm starting to lose control over all of this. Carlos is suspicious. And I can't live like this anymore. Tiago listened to me carefully, and his look became more serious. Mariana, you know you need to make a decision, he said, and the sincerity in his words hurt. I don't want you to get hurt, but if you're scared of losing your marriage, maybe it's time to think about what you really want. He was right, but the truth was terrifying. What did I want? What really mattered to me? The tension between us grew, and the need for an answer became overwhelming. I felt like a puppet, pulled between two worlds that didn't meet. What should have been simple had become a maze of emotions and consequences. And deep down, I knew the answer wasn't just about what I wanted, but also about what I was willing to sacrifice. As the day began to unfold, the pressure of the situation was building. Charles had asked about my day. And his questions seemed more incisive. I couldn't lie, but I wasn't ready to confess either. The moral dilemma began to consume me, and interactions with Tiago became more fraught with tension. That night, when I got home, I decided I needed to confront Carlos. What I was doing wasn't fair. And he deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. There was a freedom in finally opening up, and I knew I couldn't continue living in the shadow of lies. As soon as I entered the house, I found Carlos in the living room. He looked at me, and when he saw the expression on my face, I knew something was different. I took a deep breath, preparing myself. Me for the conversation that would change everything. Carlos, we need to talk, I started, feeling my heart speed up. He straightened up on the couch, his expression wary. I I have something important to tell you. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew honesty was the only way out, even though the thought of hurting the man I spent years with was unbearable. What is happening? Mariana? He frowned, his concern growing. You look different. What is happening to you? I hesitated, the words forming and disappearing in my mind like fleeting shadows. How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions that consumed me? I met someone, I finally blurted out. The truth hurting like a knife stuck in my chest. Carlos was silent, the shock on his face was evident. I didn't want this to happen, but I feel so lost, and Tiago makes me feel alive. The words came out in an uncontrollable flow, and as I spoke, I realized I was releasing a weight that had been weighing me down. James? The boy from the store? He sounded incredulous, his voice shaking with anger and disappointment. How could you, Mariana? After everything we built together? His cutting tone hit me like a cold wave, and the reality of what he was doing became brutally clear. I had betrayed not only our marriage, but the trust he placed in me. I didn't plan this. I didn't mean to hurt you, I tried to justify myself, but the words sounded empty even to me. Carlos' look was one of pain and confusion, and I knew he felt betrayed. I need you to understand me, I feel trapped in a marriage that doesn't make me happy. I was desperate for something new. This is not a justification. You made your choice, he said, his tone now calmer, but the bitterness was still present. I don't know if I can handle this, Mariana. How can I trust you again? His words were a blow, and the reality of my betrayal flooded me with guilt. I don't expect you to forgive me now, but I want to be honest. I want you to know what's happening, I said, knowing there was no turning back. What was once a peaceful life was now an emotional battlefield. The tension was high, and each breath became more labored. Carlos got up. He walked away and began to walk around the room, trying to process what he had just heard. He looked like a shadow of who he used to be, and I felt responsible for that. I need some time, he said finally, his voice low. I need to think about what you told me. At that moment, I realized that the life I knew was falling apart. The passion I had for Tiago now seemed like a distant echo as the weight of the decision fell on my shoulders. I was ready to face what came next, but the thought of losing Carlos, even with all our flaws, was painful. The next morning arrived and, with it, a heavy silence that hung over the house. Carlos had gone to the bedroom, and I didn't know what to do. The tension between us was palpable, as if the atmosphere itself was charged with electricity. The memories of the happy times we shared were now distorted shadows of the painful reality I had created. Upon arriving at the store, the expectation of seeing Tiago was mixed with the weight of guilt. It was like being on a precipice, where the impulse of passion almost pushed me forward, but remorse held me back. When I saw Tiago, your smile brightened my day, but the memory of the conversation with Carlos still burned in my mind. Hi, Mariana. Are you well? Tiago asked, concern showing in his eyes. It was impossible to hide the confusion that consumed me, but I needed to maintain the facade. I'm trying to deal with some things, I replied, forcing a smile. Tiago approached, his presence was like a balm, but also a constant reminder of the pain he had caused. You know I'm here for you, don't you? I want you to feel good, he said, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. His touch made me feel a mix of comfort and guilt. How could I be happy with him when I had hurt someone I loved? I talked to Carlos, he finally said, the truth escaping like a whisper. Tiago's gaze changed, and he pulled away slightly, the tension between us intensifying. And he knows about us. He was devastated. The declaration weighed in the air like a stone. And I saw Tiago's expression close. And now? What are you going to do? He asked, his voice now low and cautious. There was a fear in his words, a fear that I also shared. The situation had become more complicated than I imagined, and what had once seemed like an adventure was now an overwhelming moral dilemma. I don't know, Tiago. I feel so lost, I confessed, emotions overflowing. I feel trapped between two worlds. Carlos is part of my life, and I can't just ignore what we've built. Reality began to weigh more than I could bear, and tears began to fill my eyes. Tiago approached again, his gaze steady. But what about your happiness? You can't sacrifice that for someone who doesn't make you happy. You deserve more, Mariana. His words were a call to action, and in that moment, a part of me began to wonder if I was really ready to give up what I had. With every word, with every breath, I knew I needed to make a decision. What did I really want? Passion or security? And, most importantly, who was I really in this story? As the conversation unfolded, I realized the answer wasn't just about me, but about the impact my choices would have on those I loved. The path ahead was full of uncertainties, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face them. That conversation with Tiago left me in a state of emotional turmoil. Throughout the day, as I served customers in the store, the feeling of living a lie followed me like a shadow. Every smile I exchanged, every thank you I received. It only seemed to reinforce the barrier between the Mariana everyone knew and the woman who was losing herself in forbidden love. When closing time finally arrived, I could barely breathe. The freedom of my work did not bring me relief. On the contrary, the anxiety only increased. As he left the store, the night enveloped him. Me like a dark cloak, and the way home seemed longer than ever. I needed a decision, but what scared me most was that I didn't know which way to go. When I opened the door to the house, I found Carlos sitting in the living room. He had his head down, staring at the turned-off television. And I realized that the atmosphere of our house had completely changed. The once welcoming environment now felt cold and distant. A lump formed in my throat at the sight of him so vulnerable. "Hi," I murmured, not knowing what to say. Carlos lifted his head, and the pain in his eyes hit me like a blow. "Hi," he replied, voice tense. The silence that followed was deafening. We both knew something needed to be said, but the words were trapped between us, like a storm waiting to explode. Finally, I decided to break the silence. "Carlos, I know I hurt you. And I have no excuses for what I did. I need to be honest with you about how I feel." I was shaking, but I knew it was time to be clear. "Tiago makes me feel something I haven't felt in a long time. But I don't want you to feel slighted or belittled because of it." Carlos looked at me, and the sadness in his eyes was almost unbearable. "You don't need to protect me, Mariana. I'm an adult. You can be honest about your feelings," he said, his voice shaky but firm. I can't understand how you got to this point. What happened to both of us?" Carlos' questions cut like knives. What really happened? At what point did we lose each other? I didn't have all the answers. But I knew that our marriage, which had once been a safe haven, now felt like a prison. "I don't know, Carlos. Sometimes the routine becomes so suffocating that we start looking for something more, even if it means getting hurt," I confessed, feeling the weight of the truth. "I don't want to lose you. But I also can't deny how I feel about Tiago. So what are we going to do?" Carlos asked, his voice low. He looked exhausted, and I knew that whatever we decided now would define our future. I wanted everything to be simpler, but the emotions were tangled and complicated. "I need some time to think. To understand what I really want," he said. The idea of a hiatus scared me and relieved me at the same time. Carlos nodded, but the sadness in his eyes spoke more than words could express. The mourning for what we had was beginning, and I didn't know if we could get back what we lost. "And what about Tiago?" he asked. And I could hear the cut in his voice. "What are you going to do with him?" At that moment, I realized that my life had become a dangerous game of emotions. I was on the edge of a choice that could not be undone. The uncertainty became more real, and I needed to decide between overwhelming passion and the security of the love I had built. The conversation with Carlos left my heart heavy, and the night dragged on like an endless nightmare. The dilemma I faced seemed increasingly unbearable. I slept with my eyes open, with my thoughts swirling like a hurricane. The memories of good times with Carlos were mixed with the promises of a new life with Tiago. The next morning, sunlight penetrated the curtains, but there was no warmth in my chest. The emptiness that filled my house was a reflection of what I felt inside me. After a quick shower, I changed into an outfit that I would normally wear to please Carlos, as if I could fix things between us with a simple choice of attire. But deep down, I knew the situation was much more complex. When I arrived at the store, I saw Tiago waiting at the door, anxious and full of expectation. His smile should have brought joy, but it only made me feel guiltier. He approached, and as he greeted me, I could feel the warmth of his presence. "Hi, Mariana. How are you?" His voice was soft, but I could barely respond. "I'm trying to make sense of everything," I said, frustration building in my chest. He frowned, realizing something wasn't right. "I feel like something is wrong." "You don't look good," Tiago commented, and I knew it was true. He had the ability to perceive my deepest feelings. And that terrified me. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I wanted to believe that I could open up to him, but there was a barrier that stopped me. Talking to Tiago about my feelings was like touching an open wound. "Tiago, I talked to Carlos. He knows about us," I said, each word coming out reluctantly. Tiago's face hardened, and the happy expression fell. "And what did he say?" His voice was tense, and I realized that the situation between us was more delicate than I imagined. "He's hurt. He asked me to think about what I want, and I'm not sure what that means for us," I confessed, feeling the distressing reality of the situation. "I don't want you to be just an adventure for me. You are more than that. So what do you want?" Tiago questioned, and I found myself at yet another crossroads. He was right, I needed to be honest. "I want the passion I feel with you. But I don't want to destroy what still exists between me and Carlos. I feel like I'm living a lie, but I can't just ignore the years I've built with him," I responded, feeling the tears threatening to slip out. Tiago seemed to think about my words, and I knew uncertainty hung over us. "But you're fooling yourself, Mariana. Life is too short to cling to a relationship that doesn't make you happy. What do you really want?" He was right, and the truth was beginning to form in my mind, but the pain of the choice was overwhelming. "I don't know, Tiago. I really don't know," I said, feeling the weight of the confession. That moment of sincerity between us made me realize that it wasn't just a game of seduction. It was a choice about who I really wanted to be. I could be the woman who pursued passion at any cost, or the one who fought to save a marriage, even if it was falling apart. "Maybe you need some time alone to reflect on this. I don't want to be the reason you hurt yourself even more," Tiago suggested, and his words were like a bucket of cold water. He was right. I needed clarity, but what would I find in that time? "You are right. I need time to think. I don't want it to hurt us," I replied, hoping that the distance would help me see the situation better. Tiago's look was one of understanding, but also of sadness. I knew we were growing apart, and it hurt. As I walked home, I realized that the decision I made could change everything. I was in an emotional minefield, and each step was more difficult than the last. Doubt and desire were intertwined in a tangle that seemed impossible to untangle. The walk home seemed endless. The streets that used to feel familiar to me now seemed alien, full of shadows that represented my uncertainties. Every step I took echoed the weight of the choices that lay ahead, and as I approached my front door, a new wave of anxiety washed over me. Upon entering, Carlos was in the kitchen, preparing something simple, but the smell of homemade food didn't bring comfort. He turned to me and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a mask, and I could see the worry on his face. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "It was complicated," I replied, hesitating. The conversation about James was still fresh in my mind, and I knew I needed to be cautious. I didn't want to hurt Carlos, but honesty became a necessity. We talked about some things. I don't know if you're still feeling good about this. Carlos watched me closely, and I saw the flash of pain in his eyes. I just want to understand, Mariana. I don't want you to feel trapped. If you need space, I can give it to you, he said, and his words cut deeper than I expected. His generosity left me even more confused. It's not that I want distance. I just need time to think about all this, I explained, feeling the sadness seep into my voice. The idea of moving away from Carlos distressed me, but I also realized that he deserved to know the truth. I understand, but this is difficult for me. I love you, and I don't want to lose you. What we have is valuable, even with all the difficulties, Carlos continued. And I could see the vulnerability in his words. My heart ached to realize how much he still cared. I love you too, Carlos. You have always been my support, my partner. But things changed for me. I can't keep living this lie. I can't make you suffer because of my mistakes, I replied, emotion overwhelming me. So what are you going to do? What do you really want? He asked me the direct question, as if he knew I was on the verge of a monumental decision. I felt butterflies in my stomach, and the truth was slowly forming in my mind. I want to discover who I am without you. I need to understand if I can be happy alone. Or whether happiness is still with you, I said, each word feeling like a blow. The idea of leaving Carlos was terrifying, but staying in a relationship based on lies seemed unbearable. So you want some time? A hiatus between us? Carlos asked, and the tone of his voice made me feel a lump in my throat. What I was about to say could change everything between us. Yes, I need this time to find myself. It's not an easy decision, but I feel like it's what I need, I confessed, the weight of the decision falling over me like a heavy blanket. The idea of moving away from Carlos made me distressed, but I knew I needed to follow this path. Silence settled between us, filled with unspoken emotions. I looked into his eyes and saw the sadness reflected. If that's what you need, I'll respect your decision. But know that I will be here when you get back, he said, his voice low but firm. Those words were like a sharp blade. As he spoke, I realized the decision was made, but there was no clear path forward. I was about to enter unknown territory, and the thought of parting with Carlos left me with a heavy heart. I'll try to focus on myself, I said, trying to take a step forward. And maybe I can better understand what I really want. The desire for Tiago still burned in my chest, but now, somehow, there was new hope. Night fell, and I knew change was on the horizon. What would come next was uncertain, but something inside me felt like I was finally taking control of my own life.